Well, good morning, everybody, and happy Mother's Day to all the moms. And what a beautiful tribute that was, Janet. Thank you so much for sharing that. Wasn't that great? Wow. So, full disclosure, this message, so I schedule my messages out like months beforehand, and this is what we're going to speak on. And a few weeks ago, I was looking ahead a little bit, and I went, oh, wow. I'm going to be speaking about David and Goliath on Mother's Day. And I'm like, does that message work on Mother's Day? And then I began to think about it, and I thought, yeah, it does. Because, like mothers, like they slay giants all the time. Giant problems, giant teenagers, just all of it. I think about my own wife, Karen, and I just think she's the greatest mom. And, she raised 4 kids, 5 if you include me. And just watched her just like take on one problem after the other. And just a giant slayer. And so today we are going to get into the story. And the question that we're going to investigate today is, how do I overcome the giant problems facing me? How do I do that? Now, for most of us in life, we have problems, a lot of problems. And we have seasons of problems. And then sometimes we have seasons of giant problems. I'm in one of those seasons right now. I got some Goliaths in my life right now, and I'm like, whoa, this is heavy. Been there before, But then there are other times it's not so bad. But here's the thing. Like if you're here today and you don't have one problem in your life, right now, I want you just to feel your pulse, okay? Because you're officially dead. Because everybody that I know who's alive has problems, okay? And so today, I'm hoping that we can help you, give you something that will help you deal with those problems a little bit better. So we've been talking about the life of King David, and we're in the early part of his life right now. And even in the earlier part of King David's life, man, this guy had a lot of problems to deal with. For one thing, very shortly, this guy had enemies on every side of him. I mean, there's so many people that wanted to kill David. And then to make matters worse, his father-in-law, a little bit later on, his father-in-law puts a contract out on his life. His father-in-law happens to be the king of Israel. His name is Saul. And he believes that David's trying to take his throne. And so, yeah, he puts a contract out in his life. The good thing is he's got 400 loyal guys that follow him. The tough side of that is these guys are unruly. And they're really, really hard to manage. Any hard people to manage in your life? Yeah, probably a few, right? David's got 400 of them, okay? And so he's got a lot going on. And then amidst all of this stuff, he's trying to manage his spiritual life. Have you ever felt that way? You got so many things going on in your life, and you're like, and I'm trying to be godly, and I'm trying to keep it together, and I got all these problems, and sometimes it's just a lot. And so today, we're going to jump right into Scripture, and I'm going to read some good portions of Scripture too today about this story because it is such an amazing story. And it actually says on my notes, starting with verse 12, I'm actually going to start a little bit earlier than that. I'm going to start with verse 4 because I want to get us all to get a good sense of this giant and kind of what he looks like and what's going on with this guy. Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel, and he was 9 feet tall. Let's just stop there for a second. 9 feet tall? I mean, can you imagine? I mean, just try to, we've got some pretty tall NBA players, but we're talking like 9 feet tall, okay? He wore a bronze helmet, and his bronze coat of mail weighed 125 pounds, so you probably have seen those before in pictures, the bronze coat. It's like little chains just all down his body. He also wore a bronze leg armor and carried bronze javelin in his shoulder. And the shaft of his spear was so heavy, it was as heavy and as thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. So I'm trying to visualize this. It's massive, 15 pounds, that's a bowling ball. That's the end of his spear right there. His armor bearer walked ahead of him carrying a shield. So here's this massive guy, and if that's not enough, he's got this armor bearer in front of him with this huge shield. Goliath stood and shouted a taunt across to the Israelites. So here, where it is, I want you to visualize there's this ravine, and on one side is Israel, the armies of Israel. On the other side are the Philistines and their champion, Goliath. And this is what Goliath says. "Why are you all coming out to fight?" he called. "I am the Philistine champion, but you are only the servants of Saul. Choose a man to come down here and fight. If he kills me, then we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send a man who will fight me." Did the best I could on the Goliath voice there. But, yes. But this is what so in ancient times, ancient biblical times, many times this is the way they would fight. And so they would send their champion. One army would have their champion, the other army would have their champion. And these two guys would fight, and whoever won the fight, that army would win, and they would sort of work out terms, whether it was terms of peace or when you'd have to be our slaves or whatever. So this is exactly what was happening here. It says, when Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. Now David was the son of a man named Jesse, an Ephraimite from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. And Jesse was an old man at that time, and he had 8 sons. Jesse's 3 oldest sons, Eliab, Benadad, and Shemiah, had already joined Saul's army to fight the Philistines. David was the youngest son. David's 3 oldest brothers stayed with Saul's army, but David went back and forth so he could help his father with the sheep in Bethlehem. For 40 days, every morning and every evening, the Philistine champion strutted in front of the Israelite army. One day, Jesse said to David, "Take this basket of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread and carry them quickly to your brothers and give them these 10 cuts of cheese to their captain. See how your brothers are getting along and bring back a report on how they're doing." David's brothers were with Saul and the Israelites' army at the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. And so David left the sheep with another shepherd and set out early the next morning with the gifts. As Jesse had directed, he arrived at the camp just as the Israelite army was leaving for the battlefield with shouts and battle cries. Soon the Israelites and the Philistines' forces stood facing each other, army against army. And David left his things with the keeper and the supplies and hurried out to the ranks to greet his brothers. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, came out from the Philistine ranks. And then David heard him shout his usual taunt to the armies of Israel. And as soon as the Israelite army saw him, they began to run away in fright. Have you seen the giant? The men asked. He comes out each day to defy Israel. The king has offered a huge reward to anybody who kills him. He will give that man one of his daughters for a wife, and the man's entire family will be exempted from paying taxes. Interestingly enough, King Saul, who is described as being a head taller than everybody else, is just chicken. And so he's actually trying to pawn this off on somebody else. And so much so, I'll give you my daughter, and you don't have to pay taxes. He has an incentive program for whoever is willing to go out and to fight this giant. So how do I overcome these giant problems in my life? First of all, you have to refuse to be threatened by intimidation tactics. And so in verse 24 and 25, it says, as soon as the Israelites saw him, what did? They began to run away from him in fright. Have you seen the giant? I mean, these guys are running for their life. They're just terrified of these guys. And for a moment, I want you to think about what are the things that terrify you? What are the giants in your life? What are the things that intimidate you? I mean, letters from the IRS, that's pretty terrifying. Attorney letters. People who use angry words. I don't know why. That one really bothers me. I don't know why. Whenever I get around somebody and they begin to really come at me with angry words, I kind of struggle with that. People who use their authority to threaten you. I mean, we could go on and on, but all of us, there are things that intimidate us. Now here's this is so important to understand this. We can control our circumstances, or we can't control our circumstances, I should say, but we can control our response to the circumstances. And sometimes that's hard. Sometimes when you got a big giant problem in front of you, and you're like, whoa, and you just don't know how to respond. The first response probably a lot of us have is just run away from it. Just run away from that problem. Run away from whatever that giant, I don't want to deal with it. And how many of you discovered in life that when you run away from your problems, it comes back to haunt you? Because at the end of the day, you really can't, I mean, you can try, but usually it gets worse. Or the other thing that you can do, is in that situation, you get angry and then you do all the wrong things. So we have to learn how to control ourselves in those situations. And really what helps with that is to see the giant for what it really is. Usually the giants in our life, they're big and they're noisy and they're threatening and they're intimidating. But we need to see that giant through the eyes of our faith. We need to see it through the eyes of God. That I've got something that giant problem doesn't have, or that whether it's a person or a situation, I've got God. Many times when we face a giant, we forget about that. How many of you in your life have faced a giant and you've called upon God and he delivered you? Anybody here? Yeah. But why is it when we face the next giant, we totally forget about that? And we get like selective memory. It happens to all of us, and it's like, oh no, this is the worst thing that's ever happened in my life. How am I going to do this? And then if you think about it, you think, well, wait a second. I faced something last time, and God got me through that one. Why do I think that he won't get me through this one? So for 40 days, Goliath stood on the other side of the ravine, and he's yelling out to these guys. But on this particular occasion, there's something different that happens on this day, this 40th day. And that is that he actually crosses over to their side. Now, prior to this, he's been on his side. They're all, they're both armies are they're talking, yelling at each other. But this time, he crosses over and he comes to their side. And there's a principle here, and that principle is this. If you let the giant hang around long enough, they're going to get emboldened. They're going to encroach on your territory, and they're going to start invading your life. You can't let a giant do that. At some point, you got to go, you know what? I can't run from this. I can't be dumb about this and get angry and act in all the wrong ways. But I just need to deal with this. So I guess the question to you would be, what is the actual giant that you are facing right now in your life? Because I imagine all of you have something going on. Whether it's a family issue, a financial issue, maybe it's a giant addiction issue. Something, and it's just so big in your life, and it's that giant that you're trying to deal with. What is that right now in your life? And how are you dealing with it? Are you making any progress? Are you running from it? So in Psalm 29:11, and this is actually David wrote this psalm, and he said this. He said, "The Lord gives strength to his people, and the Lord blesses his people with peace." David always called upon the Lord. He said, man, I need strength, I need peace. I'm gonna call on the Lord. And I just want to encourage you today, whatever problem you are facing, call upon the Lord just the same way David did, and he will give you strength. Tap into the power that you have in the Lord. So the army of Israel, God, look at their response. They see the giant, what do? They run for their life. They're giving this giant so much more power than he actually has. And they're just so intimidated by him. And interestingly enough, they totally forgot about their own God. The God who's far more powerful than anything that this giant can bring. They give him way too much credit. And sometimes we do that. Philippians chapter 4, verse 13 says, "For I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength." In those moments when you're up against a big problem, you got to draw upon the strength that you have in God. And say that my God is actually bigger than this problem. My God is bigger than whatever this thing that is right in front of me. So how do I overcome the giant problem? Secondly, I got to recognize and critique and reject criticism. There's a difference between critique and criticism. Criticism makes me feel better because I can get it off my chest, right? I'm able to judge. I feel like I'm empowered, like I told you. But it doesn't help. It only aggravates the situation. But critique, on the other hand, is me talking to you and saying, I'm gonna speak into you to help you be the very best person you can be. That's critique. Like, this is a growing moment, maybe, for that person. So in 1 Samuel 17:28, it says, but when David's oldest brother, and this is a really interesting encounter, by the way, Eliab heard David's talking to the men, he was angry. It's kind of a big brother thing, right? What are you doing around here anyway, he demanded. What about those few sheep you're supposed to be taking care of? I know about your pride, deceit. You just want to see the battle. Now, you got to kind of know what's going on with the big brother and the little brother thing right here. So last week, if you were here, Samuel, who was the prophet, came over to the house of Jesse, David's father and Eliab's father, and he brought this anointing oil to anoint the next king of Israel. Nobody knows who it's going to be. And Eliab, the oldest, thinks it's going to be him because in those times, the oldest son had pretty much all the rights. There was like a sense of entitlement, like, I'm the oldest, so, I'm going to get most of the rights. But it doesn't happen. And he passes right by Eliab, and he just goes, to brother number 2, number 3, all the way down until finally they call David, the shepherd boy, in, and he gets anointed. Now, you got to know that this messed with Eliab. You got to know he's like, that punk little brother of mine, man. Can't believe he got anointed to be the king of Israel and not me. So there's a lot of tension and anger that's going on right here. And I think there's kind of a principle that's here too. Isn't it interesting that we can so easily see our guilt in somebody else? Like, what he's really doing is projecting. I mean, when he says, he calls them out and he says, you have pride and deceit. Who actually has pride and deceit? It's Eliab, not David. So easy for us to do that. One of the commentators I was reading about in this passage said this. He says there's a possibility that in this Hebrew text it implies when he's speaking to David, you've come down here to be seen in the battle. In other words, you came down here to show off. So, he's doing that big brother thing. When we face giants in our lives, we can easily get distracted by other things, can't we? Like here's the giant, but then here's this over here, and this problem over here. And this is actually what's going on with David, because David is looking at Goliath, and he's going, that's the target right there. That's what we're dealing with that. But then he's got Eliab over here, bugging him and, kind of getting in his face a little bit. And we have to be careful because sometimes we can easily get distracted by other things and get away from the main issue and really start getting into other battles. I remember the very first church that I pastored a long time ago. It was a tough situation, and there was a lot of battles that were going on in the church. And I remember one day I called in one of the great leaders that I knew, and he sat me down, and I just poured my heart out to this guy. And I go, man, I'm going through so much right now, and there's so many, these battles that are going on inside this church and everything. And he looked at me and he said, Steve, calm down. He said, hey, buddy. He goes, you got to pick the hills that you're going to die on. You can't pick them all. So which one is it going to be? I think that was some of the greatest advice I've ever received. See, there's that giant out there. We're looking at that giant, and then there's this problem over here and this problem over here. We got to take care of the giant first, the Goliath in our life. So David knew this, and so he doesn't mess with Eliab. He goes, whatever, He just wisely, he walks away from it. And sometimes that's what we got to do. We just got to walk away from that other distraction, that other problem, whatever it might be. David says, what have I done? It's only asking a question. And then he walks away. So here's some free Mother's Day advice that I learned on a personal level. So if you're going to get engaged in an argument, don't do it by texting. Anybody ever learned that lesson? Oh my gosh, I was thinking back to some years ago, and my parents had passed away, and I have 2 siblings, 2 sisters, and we were having to sort of, deal with the estate, and I thought I started this texting, and the next thing I know, it is going all wrong. And so it wasn't very long before I was on the phone, trying to straighten the whole situation out. Because how many of you know that when you're texting, a message sent is not necessarily message received? And so anyway, that's free advice right there for you guys, okay? Maybe it'll help you. The third thing we see is, how do I overcome the giant problem? Resolve to take the next best step. And this is so important. What is the next best step? So let's get back into the story here a little bit. Verse 41 to 47. Goliath walked towards David with his shield bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt at this ruddy-faced boy. "Am I a dog?" he roared at David. "You come at me with a stick?" And he cursed David by the names of his God. "Come over here, I'll give your flesh and birds to the wild animals," Goliath yelled. And David replied to the Philistine, "You come at me with a sword and a spear and a javelin? But I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of God's armies of Israel, whom you have defied. And today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. And then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and the wild animals. And the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And everyone assembled there will know that the Lord rescues his people." But I catch this last part. But not with the sword and spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give it to us. That's powerful. Powerful words. So much truth in that. So David's next step is to move towards the giant instead of running away from him. Even as the giant, this guy's intimidating, hurling insults at him, at this army. But he's standing, I love the fact that he's standing on the promises of God. He doesn't have a sword in his hand. He's just got a sling and a stone. And he says, I'm going to stand on what God is about. By the way, you'll notice that Goliath is inciting these taunts using the names of his own gods. And David goes, "Oh, no. We're not doing that. We're talking about God. And I'm standing on God, Jehovah." So doing battle with giants is hard. And let me just say this, and this is one of those things that might be hard to hear. It is one of the loneliest experiences you'll ever have, because I've taken on a lot of giants in my life. And sometimes there's nobody there. You just got to do it by yourself. But God will be there with you. And here's the beautiful part about it. Once you take a giant down, you know that you can do it again, because you're battle tested. You do. And every giant that you take down, whatever the next one comes around, you go, I've seen stuff like you before. I can take you down. We actually have a picture of David and Goliath here. That's the actual picture. Yeah, look at that. Look how huge. I mean, isn't that what your problems look like? Just like huge, massive problem. You're like, how am I ever going to overcome this? And then you look at, he's got the huge shield, and like, wow. And I've just got this sling and a stone. What am I going to do? Who am I? When I was 15 years old, I took on one of my first giants. It was kind of a crazy situation. I was going to a really tough school, and there was a lot of bullies around the school. And I just tried to avoid him, and there was one guy who was really like taunting me and threatening me, and I'm like, I just tried to stay away from him, but he was pushing me and whatever. And so one day I was with a couple of friends, and we went off campus. And as we were coming back, and this is kind of like a bad section of town at that time, I took a shortcut down an alley, which really was a pretty bad idea. Because at the end of that alley, I was met by this guy and another guy. And I'm like, oh no. And so just about the time I was getting ready to run, my friends had already run. They were long gone. I realized, I thought, you know what? I'm trying to stay away from this guy. He just keeps coming at me, and I just don't know what to do. So I just stood there, and he walked up to me, and he put his face about 3 inches away from my face. And he just started threatening me and intimidating me and taunting me. And I thought to myself, well, it looks like we're going to fight, so if we're going to fight, I may as well get in the first punch. So I just punched him really hard in the face, and then he punched me, and then we fought. I mean, we fought until we were so tired we could barely stand up. We bloodied each other up, and I still remember, we were just kind of going, I don't know if you've ever been in a fight like that before. It was brutal. And then finally, we both just walked away. The next day, saw him at school, walked up to him, and I go, how's it going? He goes, how about you? Yeah, pretty good fight, huh? Yeah, man. We became best friends. Just saying, sometime you might make friends with a giant. Not always. But the thing is, I had to face it. I had to face that situation. In verses 48 through 50, let's get to the end of the story because it's just so amazing. As Goliath moved closer to the attack, David quickly ran out to meet him. And reaching into his shepherd's bag and taking out a stone, he hurled it with his sling and he hit the Philistine in the forehead. And the stone sank in, and Goliath stumbled and fell face down on the ground. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. And so David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. Then David ran over and he pulled Goliath's sword from his sheath, and David used it to kill him and do the very thing that he said he was going to do, cut off his head. Gnarly. Oh, man, Moms, I hope you can appreciate that story. But you're giant killers, And metaphorically speaking, you've done a lot of that yourself. So here's the question. I want to leave you with this. What is your next step? What is your next step in facing your giant? Because there needs to be a next step. You can't let that giant hang around too much longer. He'll begin to, invade into your territory. Because to this point, probably you've prayed about it, and you have analyzed it to death, and you have talked about it, and you're experiencing paralysis of analysis and everything else, what am I going to do? And you maybe are losing sleep over it. And here's what I want to leave you with. Now, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Let's pray. Father, I think every single one of us know what it means to face a giant, some kind of a giant in our life. It scares us. Sometimes we lose sleep over it. So much anxiety. We pray about it. But we have to face it. But we don't have to face it alone, Lord, because you'll be with us. You'll be with us. And so for every person that is here or online right now who hears this, I pray, Lord, that you would give them courage in this moment. Let them think about a next step. In fact, maybe in this moment, you'll begin to show them what that next step will be. Maybe it'll be going to see somebody they need to talk to or a phone call. Maybe it'll be checking in someplace to get help with an addiction issue. Maybe a conversation that has needed to take place for a long time and it's been avoided up to this point. But that conversation needs to happen. So Lord, show every person right now who's dealing with some kind of a Goliath issue in their life right now, what is the next step? And then show them that you'll be there to help them, encourage them. And then you're going to get them through it. And then when they get through it, they're going to be so strong. They're going to have more courage. They're going to be battle tested. And life is just going to get better. I pray that if there's somebody that doesn't know you today, they realize that the greatest thing they could ever do is surrender their life to you right now. No longer will they be alone. No longer will they enter into the battles of life without support. because they'll have the ultimate support, you, to help them.